You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about the 1981 3D spaghetti western coming at you. Here we go.
Things will be coming at us, and we'll be coming at this movie from every conceivable angle that you can think of, including some that you did not think of, like under the floorboards pointed up at someone's crotch.
That's right. So you're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. Pete Charbonneau, who was just talking about floorboards and crotches and shotgun blasts. And we're talking about Coming At Ya, the 1981 movie that was a shotgun blast to our eyes, but not to many audiences in 1981, Pete.
Not our hearts.
Not our hearts. Maybe not our hearts.
I saw God-fearing people stripped of their young women and struck down by minions of the devil. Evil men, led by two evil brothers.
What did they do with the women?
If you ever want to see that scumbag brother of yours again, you do exactly what I say.
You don't have to be afraid, because I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of here.
We started digging into 3D movies, and as we're wont to do, we dug deep. We started with Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin. We went into space again with Space Hunter, Adventures of the Forbidden Zone. We talked about Parasite 3D.
We touched on, because a lot of this centered around the 80s, and we also touched on our memories of the television event that was apparently across the entire United States, the Revenge of the Creature, where we had to go to your local 7-Eleven / convenience store to get your 3D glasses for that cinematic television letdown that I think.
That's right. But it's really not these movies like Parasite or Treasure of the Four Crowns that we talked about with Austin, literally the man who wrote the book on Canon films, not once but twice in both volumes. Those weren't the 3D films that you and I really remembered. Friday the 13th in 3D, Amityville 3D, Jaws 3D. Those were the big box office whales that brought folks to the theaters to see the 3D 80s fad.
Yeah, and I think the amazing thing was, especially growing up at that period, and that's why I have the recollections of Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, and Space Hunter, because I was, you can judge the level of fortune that I had to have seen those in the theater, but that was my recollection. And then remembering and seeing Jaws 3D in the theater, but remembering that Friday the 13th, Amityville coming out after that and being like, oh yeah, the 80s had this like big 3D resurgence, but it didn't really last very long, nor did, I don't think, any of those films really, bring in a ton of money at the box office. Certainly not enough to keep, and we talked about this on an earlier episode, the technology at the time, what it costs to like retrofit theaters to show 3D in that format, very different than what would evolve in the 2000s. Just keeping it back firmly entrenched in the 80s, these movies were, even though they were pretty low budget, the cost to retrofit a theater to show this on a regular basis was pretty great, and I don't think studios were really seeing the recuperation of their marketing and creative efforts. So yeah, this trend did not last a terribly long time. But that being said, as we're going to talk about today with Coming At Ya, like, we've discovered a couple of films that we had never even heard, just completely off our radar. While we haven't been able to enjoy them in 3D, we certainly can see what was intended to be shown in 3D, and think it's going to make for another fascinating conversation when we talk about the one that kicked off the 80s 3D boom, which was not a sci-fi movie, not a Star Wars ripoff, but a spaghetti western of all things.
When we started digging into 3D history, everyone seems to credit this movie, whatever it is that begins the trend for studios to start reevaluating movies that we saw were retrofitted to become 3D. And we saw that in the movie, in the production, where things seemed like they were added on. Maybe they threw some money at the production. I think we saw that with Space Hunter, Adventures of the Forbidden Zone, where some things poke out at you, But then at other times we've seen where the 3D effects were not nearly as obvious. It made it harder for us to kind of watch these movies in 2D and even see where the 3D would be, unlike Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, which again, if you haven't listened to any of these 3D summer episodes, that one made by Charles Band, ingrained in your memory is like finger pointing at the screen, laser blast coming at you, because that it was meant to take advantage of the technology. If there's a plot, sure, that's fine. But just so interesting that all of the DNA for these movies goes back to, like you said, the spaghetti Western that first watch for both of us.
Yeah, it's wild. It really is. I think the Western as a genre was pretty dead around 1981.
Yes.
The 70s, you had some of those spaghetti Westerns that were still kicking around, but for all intents and purposes, the 80s was pretty dry as in terms until you get later on. I mean, you had Young Guns come out in the mid 80s.
Good point.
But I think it wasn't until Unforgiven that kind of kicked off that Western resurgence. But at this point, it was like, I don't think there was a huge clamoring to see another Western. And then for the creators of this movie to be like, well, not only will we do a spaghetti Western, but, let's revitalize the 3D craze or bring it back in some way. So to nobody's surprise, and certainly probably not to yours or definitely not to my surprise, watching this by the people that made Treasure of the Four Crowns, it is very much in the same vein, very, very similar films in terms of the opening titles.
Yes.
It's like literally throw everything that you can think of at the camera and be like, ooh, 3D coming at you. The title, again, doesn't refer to anything that happens. It doesn't refer to anything resembling the plot of this film. It's really just the marketing gimmick to be like, no, literally things will be coming at you. And I compiled I don't think an exhaustive or definitive list of things that come at you.
There's a lot of them. There's a ton.
There's a lot.
Yes.
And I do have a list. We'll get to that a bit later. I'm curious, now having seen this for the first time and having had the discussions about the other films that you've mentioned, what were your first thoughts about coming at you, the Tony Anthony star vehicle?
JT Stryker, wasn't he in Treasure? And now we get him as H.H. Hart in Coming at Ya. Man, this guy. It was better than I expected, Pete. I have to say that. Because again, we saw Treasure, and that was gimmick first, movie second. That came out after Coming at Ya. So I was thinking, well, if this is their first go-round, first attempt at movie making, attempt at 3D, this one will be rough around the edges. And at least for me, I think this one is a little tighter. Maybe it's because of the genre. Still obviously playing around with 3D as a gimmick. They threw everything at the screen, but I still felt this was maybe a better film than Treasure of the Four Crowns. So in some ways, I kind of enjoyed watching Coming at Ya a little bit more than Treasure.
I completely agree with you, and I think you're spot on. I think what Coming at You benefits from is the genre, as opposed to Treasure of the Four Crowns, which is kind of a Raiders ripoff. It's like a mashup of a bunch of different things. I think that the fact that it's a Western allows it to kind of operate in a tighter story, and it's a very basic story. I mean, the simple plot, man and woman on their wedding day seem to be very happy. A bunch of desperados, bad guys break into the chapel, shoot him up, steal her. And then it's a case of just, him going about getting his revenge and getting his wife back from this group of bad guys. And so that's your basic story. That's your basic plot. And you go from there. And Treasure of the Four Crowns is a little more meandering. I think we talked about that on the podcast. There are scenes and there's some of that here. We'll get into like the bat scene.
That's in my notes, the bat scene.
But Treasure of the Four Crowns, there were just scenes that just like, it was almost like they were filming you don't need to film every moment of how they get from one end of the room to the next, but they did that. I guess you want to pad out your runtime. Sure. That's one way to do it. But this one's just a lot tighter. It moves at a much better pace. And I think overall it's a better film. So while I enjoyed watching Treasure of the Four Crowns, I enjoyed this one probably a little bit more, just because there was more of a familiarity there to what I was seeing on screen.
So I guess what's your relationship status with Westerns? Because I know we were talking about this texting a little bit, and you'd mentioned Have Gun Will Travel, like you were a fan of that. So 30s, 60s, right? You get like Stagecoach, Searchers, High Noon, like Man Who Shot Liberty, balance. Those were the Hollywood romanticized, the myth of like frontier freedom with Cary Grant. And there was that version. Then there were like the TV shows. And I know you mentioned, Have Gun Will Travel is something that it was a show that you watched, that you enjoyed.
Yeah, I came to that later. Like that was that was that was around like pandemic beginnings of stuck in your apartment, and MeTV would have I think like Western Saturdays or something like that. It was fascinating to me to see, because it was such an industry back then. Like there were so many Westerns on television. Yeah, I mean, Bonanza is the one that jumps to mind because that was one of the most popular ones. But then there was Gunsmoke with James Arness, The Big Valley with a young Lee Majors before The $6 Million Man, Barbara Stanwyck. That was like a big thing at the time because she was a big movie star, but then was, like, I'm just going to anchor this television show. And things like, Have Gun Will Travel, which starred Richard Boone, who I had known from the Rankin Bass TV movie, The Last Dinosaur, which I loved as a kid.
Okay.
And I will not go on a tangent on The Last Dinosaur right now, but we'll do that later. So I've grown to appreciate Westerns a lot more. And, and growing up in the 80s, Young Guns, Tombstone, the not so serious Westerns, but then Unforgiven comes on the scene, and then you have got like some really interesting stuff. Like I remember going to see the Sisters Brothers a couple of years ago with Joaquin Phoenix and John C. Reilly. Yes. And so like there's something about that time period. There's something about those vistas that just really, I get what the appeal was, throughout the ages. So whether it's TV shows, whether it's movies, I will, if there's a hook to be found in a Western, I'll go see it. I wouldn't say it's really not my favorite genre. It's not something that I'm extremely well versed in, but there's an interest there to it just because of, I think, everything that it encompasses. And I think that the fact that it has reinvented itself many times over, like, you watch a TV show from the 50s and 60s, it's very basic. It's very of its time. But to see new things explored as the decades have gone on, and like kind of pulling the veneer away from just like the man with no name, Clint Eastwood type stuff of like stoic hero, and getting into more stories about women's roles in the West and how these things, so it's not just about like gunslinger and that's it, like very male patriarchy centered storytelling. I think that much like a desert in bloom in the winter, you have this flowering of different types of stories to be told. That is not coming at you.
That is not, no, not at all.
But that's just where I'm coming from as a Western, appreciation standpoint. How about yourself?
So a lot of my recollection of early Western shows, like you said, Bonanza, Maverick, Have Gun Will Travel, even Wild Wild West, which to me was the James Bond Get Smart of that genre. And I remember watching those with my dad. He really enjoyed them, but he also grew up with all of those Technicolor widescreen Howard Hawks Ford style movies with John Wayne. So I was growing up where those were a little too old for me. So I leaned into more of the spaghetti Westerns, and it's one of the few genres where I can actually connect all the dots on how I got there. My buddy Dre, who I've known now for I think about 30 years, we worked at Best Buy together. He knew I was really into films, and he brought me a copy of John Woo's Hard Boiled.
Okay.
And if you've ever seen Hard Boiled, it ups the ante of action, especially for someone, like us. We grew up on 80s films, Seagal, Van Damme. But when you see Hard Boiled, when you see Chow Yun-fat as the main character, when you see the intensity, almost like the balletic action that John Woo does, it's so distinct from everything else I'd seen. So I just went down the rabbit hole. And from Hard Boiled, find out that he's inspired by Sam Peckinpah. And Sam Peckinpah had directed The Wild Bunch. So I check out The Wild Bunch. I see Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia that he directed as well. These movies just look different. I don't know how, but they feel different than John Wayne movies. They feel different than High Noon. So I got to check out who inspired Sam Peckinpah. And then you get into like the Sergio Leone movies. And once you see that, you're like, got it. I'm not watching Butch Cassidy anymore. I have to watch Fistful of Dollars. And then that got me into the two Sergios, Sergio Leone and Sergio Carbucci. And if you don't know much about spaghetti Westerns, you get Sergio Leone, Fistful of Dollars, right? That's like the seminal movie, 61 or 62 or whatever. Everything we talk about with spaghetti westerns, like the anti-hero in Clint Eastwood, grizzled, looks very different than John Wayne, not romanticized, hyper-violence, things we did not see in those romanticized, like American expansion myth type westerns that we grew up with, right? And then you get Ennio Morricone music, operatic, almost like religious, and then a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor. So there's a little bit of whimsy in all of that. That got my attention. Just go down the rabbit hole and you see good movies like The Great Silence, a spaghetti western that blew my mind. And, you know, I could go on and on. We should do an episode on spaghetti westerns because I really do love them so much. But I think that's why, kind of going back to Coming at You, I think that's also why this movie kind of started on third base with me, because it was already tackling a genre that I love, and it wasn't nearly as gimmicky as the other movie they made, which was riding, like you said, the Raiders' coattails and didn't fully stick the landing as a movie or a plot. It was just a collection of scenes held together by rafters and maybe carabiners. That's their Treasure of the Four Crowns. This, it checked all those boxes. Like, we get the anti-hero, the grizzled hero, like you said, the vistas, the landscape, the southern Italy or Spain taking the place of the Southwest. This feels and looks like a spaghetti western. Now, if it accomplishes that well, and I think it does, layer on top of that the 3D thing, it makes it a little bit more interesting. Doesn't make it great, but it certainly made it interesting to watch.
Oh, for sure. I think anyone that has ever seen, even if you've seen a clip of a spaghetti western, if you've seen 30 seconds of Sergio Leone movie and you pop this on, yeah, this fits the genre.
Yes.
You know, the sun-drenched sunset shots of like the silhouette of like our hero H.H. Hart. Again, I don't know where that name came from. I don't, no clue. I think he's only mentioned by name twice by his wife, I think, who calls him Hart.
Little did you know the H and H just stood for heart and heart.
Heart to Heart. Maybe.
Oh, that's it.
Like Stephanie Powers and show up in it. But yeah, no, there's like, yeah, these absolutely oversaturated shots of like deep oranges, reds, and yellows that you got. And there's a couple of those in the film. So where I give them a ton of credit was that, you know, they captured the look. I thought the opening title sequence, while it was making me laugh out loud, I thought was like really, again, it was just like,
it was pretty inventive, right?
Like, yeah, so let's just bring all this shit at the wall and just have fun with it. Like literally the whole opening title sequence is a series of 3D things, or the titles are on actual items.
Yes.
In frame, and then he's like picking up like a sack that has like, you know, art direction by so and so, and then he's like bringing the sack like into the camera, like it's like,
that's right,
busting out at you. Is it cheesy? Yes, it's a little cheesy, but for 1981, what they were doing, I'm like, this is, you know, I'm kind of digging this. I like what they did. They had fun with it. Great. Let me see some more of this, and then they proceeded to just literally throw everything at that camera.
And I think it's kind of a good thing that we saw Treasure of the Four Crowns and talked about it with Austin, because it prepped me a little bit for this movie. But again, spaghetti western, 3D, low budget 3D from the makers of Treasure of the Four Crowns. I think I know what I'm getting into. But also the title kind of throws you a curveball, because Coming at You, again, I'll go into more detail on it in our eventual Spaghetti Westerns podcast that we'll have to do. But like most genres in film, they kind of have their beginning and their end. And Westerns certainly had that. But with Spaghetti Westerns, you get Sergio Leone, and then you get the offshoots, like hype even more violent than Sergio Leone or Sergio Corbucci violence. A little bit more auteur. As these movies progress, they kind of mirror a lot of like the disaster films that we grew up with, because one of the movies that we enjoy is Airplane. And that was kind of like the bookend to a lot of those disaster films like Airport, where they were, you know, or what is it, Poseidon Adventure, you know, like sinking ship, airplane about to crash in an airport, chaos ensues. Well, the Trinity movies with Terrence Hill are kind of the Airplane to all of those movies. But by that point, and I think those were like in the late 70s before Coming at You, they're spoofing themselves like Airplane is spoofing Airport. So when I saw the title Coming at You, that's actually what I was expecting, that this was on the heels of movies that were going to make kind of like spoof the genre, hoping that it was actually going to be closer to the spaghetti westerns that I love. And I think that's why, again, pleasant surprise that, yep, those opening scenes, grabbing the snake bottle, that was really cool.
The snake was glued to the bottle. Did you see that?
Poor snake. Yeah.
I mean, folks, there's a scene, there's a 3D effect to a horse eating a watermelon.
Yes, the watermelon gets cracked open, and it's literally like, that's the plot point. It's let the horse now eat this watermelon. I mean, I'm grateful for the horse. Maybe not so great. I feel bad for that snake, though, now in hindsight. But
if you haven't seen it, like, they literally glue the snake to a glass bottle that's dangling so that they can have the camera pan up, and the snake is stuck to the bottle, but that's how they got their shot. And I feel, wherever that snake is, I'm sure it's in, snake heaven right now, but I felt really bad for that poor creature.
It's also on IMDb, Pete, just letting you know. The snake is on IMDb.
Snake is got its own IMDb page?
That's right, yes. It might also be part of a class action lawsuit with all the animals that were used in 3D in this and in Treasure.
It's the same snake that was in the Martin Cove 80s vehicle, Steel Justice.
Steel Justice has to, we got to visit that movie too. All right, so here's some info on this movie, Pete, that I think you'll be interested in. And I will give credit where credit is due. The 80s movie podcast that's hosted by Edward Haven, someone that I'm going to try to reach out to because I think he'd be a fun conversation to have. Definitely leans into the nostalgia, but he tackles in great detail, as you will soon see, thank courtesy all his research, some of the movies and TV shows we grew up with in the 80s. It's 1980. Dial M for Murder in Hitchcock gets re-released in 3D and gets some attention. Okay, people are starting to kind of go back to this fad that was made popular in like the 50s and 60s and kind of disappeared. Now it's 1981. At the same time, you get Quintano and Marshall Lupo, who produce Coming At Ya. They're friends and co-workers. They're actually Xerox salesmen, and they start their own supply company in Washington, D.C. Thing is, the two of them, Quintano and Marshall Lupo, know the actor Tony Anthony. And Tony's already worked in the film industry, in spaghetti westerns, in Italy. I guess he did some series called The Stranger. So the three guys trying to figure out, how do we get to work together? And Quintano hears about the success of Dial M for Murder, the 3D resurgence. So they start researching 3D. They find something called Optimax 3D technology, and they basically start doing a bunch of cocktail dinners and fundraising, and they raise somewhere between, from what I read online, like $2 to $3.5 million to make Coming At You. It has a 13-week shoot, the movie does. They show the movie in L.A., and immediately they get a bunch of offers, I guess, after the showing, and the one that they accept is Filmways. I'm not familiar with Filmways, but I'm familiar with the movies because they did Death Wish 2, Cincinnati Kid, and they produced a ton of shows from the rural comedies era of the 60s, Mr. Ed, Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, and Green Acres. So they schedule one screening of Coming At Ya in Phoenix. Does super well, considering it's only one screen. Then they move it to KC, and they expand it for 8 to 9 weeks. New York, Chicago, LA, ends up making $12 million in the box office. And looks like budget for it is somewhere between like the $2 to $3 million that they raised, and a lot of it going towards the 3D technology. Success of this is kind of widely credited again for sparking the fad. A few months later, you get all the announcements. And when we talked to Treasure of the Four Crowns about with Austin, he was saying how like all those booklets from the cans and all those other film markets that are out there, everyone's like in 3D. Like you just add in 3D to the end to try to ride those coattails. Everything goes into production. One of those being Parasite that we talked about, Charles Band. So then a lot of the investors in Coming At You end up signing up on the next production the trio want to do, and they call it Seeing is Believing, because obviously Coming At Ya, not good enough. Seeing is Believing. Oh my God, so good, isn't it? But then they combine the popularity of Raiders at that point, the 3D fad, and that's where we get Treasure of the Four Crowns. And again, if you're listening to this, you should listen to that 2-part episode where we talk about it with Austin Trunick, who wrote the books on Canon. So Filmways goes out of business. They sell everything to Orion Pictures, and we've seen the logo for that one from many VHS and cable viewings. Orion isn't interested in a 3D movie, so they sell Treasure of the Four Crowns, and Canon picks it up. After the success of Treasure, we get Space Hunter. So the origin of this movie, and then literally what it sparks in those early years, well before we even get the Jaws or Friday the 13th or Amityville 3D. So kind of cool to see like these guys like started a trend that big studios jumped on.
Yeah, and who doesn't love a good like DIY, like just using some belief and obviously some connections.
Yes.
But it reminds me, not knowing all the details of this story, but I imagine it's probably a really good story. But, it reminds me again of like the Raimi brothers and Bruce Campbell just kind of hanging around suburban Detroit and, like, oh, we're going to do this Into the Woods thing. And then like how they just went around shopping their ideas and getting whoever they could to help produce it. I don't think they raised $2 to $3 million, but they raised enough to do Evil Dead. And then, the rest from there is history. And if you want to read how that was done, please pick up a copy of Bruce Campbell's If Chins Could Kill, because it's a fantastic read. But it reminds me of things like that. And then again, I think we've talked about it many times. This is like the fascinating stuff. It almost, I don't know if it enhances the movie that we watch, but it certainly gives us another talking point that kind of gives this movie extra life beyond what it just is as a viewing experience. Because we've all sat in the theater or at home watching something and be like, and there's a podcast called, How Did This Get Made? Like, how the fuck does this thing ever see the light of day? And this is one of those things where you're kind of like, how did this happen? And
turns out it was two Xerox salesmen and their buddy who just happened to be a spaghetti Western, not star, but at least was in various spaghetti Westerns. That's all you need. And the motivation, hustle, and maybe some good cocktails to raise some decent money to make it happen. Remember, you can find the Fan2Fan Podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan2Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN. On Instagram at Fan2Fan Podcast or on Twitter at Fan2Fan Podcast. We'd love to hear from you, so send a message and let us know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
They bring in Ferdinando Baldi, who directs this movie, and he was an Italian director. He actually made a good movie called The Django Prepare a Coffin that if you like the Sergio Leone ones, you dig into the Django series, and Django Prepare a Coffin, one of my favorites. It's just really neat. It's literally this guy who walks around with a coffin behind him. That's it. Like, that's the movie. That's all you really need to know. But this guy directed that. So now you have someone who at least has a pedigree for spaghetti Westerns to do this. And I think that's why we get the movie that looks like the thing we expected it to look like, with the sunrises, with the landscapes. Doesn't enhance necessarily the movie and make it better, but like you said, it does enhance maybe a little bit of the viewing experience, especially now in hindsight, knowing more about it.
By no means is this a cinematic masterpiece, but it shot well. There is some good composition. There was talent involved here for sure. There are plenty of problems with it. Again, like the female, like Hart's wife, who I believe her character's name is Abilene. Again, not sure she's ever named in the movie, but she really doesn't have much to do but be damsel in distress.
Yes.
Basically, I wouldn't call her a MacGuffin, but she's like, she's the plot point. Like, he has to win, he has to get her back because these two brothers, Pike and Poke.
Yes, Pike and Poke.
Just, for a reason that's, I guess it's kind of explained. Like, they're basically kidnapping women in the area and then auctioning them off to apparently wealthy Mexican landowners to then force them into prostitution. Basically, the plot in a nutshell. And then Tony Anthony is there to exact his revenge. Does not always have the best plan about how he's going to get his wife back. It leads to a lot of innocent people dying. In fact, I would say almost all of the innocent people dying, all the women that have been kidnapped meet a rather brutal demise, and essentially it's his fault. So
pretty much, he definitely is the antithesis of the Clint Eastwood, who you always felt had his shit together and had a plan in case the plan didn't work out. This guy kind of went the road less traveled. I have no plan. I'm just going to burn the whole building down. Oh, shit. I'm inside the building. Maybe I should have started that fire. I was like, oh, all right. Well, thank you, Tony Anthony, for bringing that. Pike. All right. Pike and Pope. Pike is actually Gene Quintano, the producer, by the way. And I read that, quote, he appeared in it mostly as a matter of economics, which, again, makes sense, right? If you're Raimi, you put your brother in everything. Why? It's a matter of economics. And if your buddy is Bruce Campbell, he's the star. Why? Because it's Bruce Campbell. Makes sense. If you're Quintano, that's fine. I'll chew the scene a little bit. I'll be the bad guy. Did you notice that Pike was wearing, like, Civil War North blues and his brother Polk was wearing South gray?
I didn't make that connection, but now that you say that, yes. Yeah.
And it's not that it's addressed at all. It's never like brother against brother. It seems like there was another story there. They just chose not to tell that story. But I was like, is this going to come up later at some point? Oh, no, that's just completely tossed aside.
That would make for a much more interesting film. Yeah. It's funny. And it's weird because Gene Quintano, I believe, is an American actor, writer. I think he wrote a bunch of the Police Academy movies.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
But his voice is dubbed in this, and it's like weird because like the dubbed voice speaks in a way that is like it's not. It seems very unrealistic for the genre film that it's in.
No, but to be fair, that actually made sense with genre film with spaghetti westerns because they were kind of like the Tower of Babel, where you would get like I know there's an interview with Sergio Corbucci I've seen recently. I think it's called Django on Django, and it's Quentin Tarantino kind of really bringing Sergio Corbucci to the light to be like, hey, if you only know Sergio Leone, there's another Sergio. And in that interview, he talks about how he's like, oh yeah, like I have a Frenchman as the lead actor, someone from Spain, and I have an Australian actor.
Now, in this film, I noticed that you're not recording any direct sound.
Speech usually in westerns of minor importance because we use every nationality, French, Mexican, American. It is often better for the actors to count than to speak. For example, the Frenchman would say, un, deux, trois. The American says, one. That means yes, but it could mean anything. It's unimportant. That's why I hate westerns.
After this, Mr. Corbucci, what films will you do?
A western, naturally.
So in some ways, that's where like the dubbing, I wasn't surprised by it. Yep, yeah. But totally makes sense, at least I thought, for this movie.
Yeah, just one of like the novelty, interesting things when you're watching it. Yeah, because like, the brothers it's an interesting combination because Pike, Gene Quintano's kind of like the leader of this gang.
That's right.
For all intents and purposes, his brother is kind of just he's like a heavyset guy that just basically wants to go around and, just speaking frankly, go around raping women like in the countryside, which he does. He does get his comeuppance at the hands of Tony Anthony. There's like this. I found it interesting when they're portraying like the brothers and this gang as the bad guys. Like they show them doing like really despicable things. So it's like it starts to cross the line a little bit cinematically, where it's like, okay, we get it. Like you've shown us like these are not good guys, but then they like take it like, and we're just gonna yank it like way over the line. Yep. It's like, yeah, we get it. There.
And there's almost like a bit of a relief when Tony Anthony kind of comes in, albeit without a plan, but to just kind of break up the sadism.
More hint at things rather than having to show every single thing. Yeah. But I get that's part of like, the exploitation aspect of it. So wasn't surprised. It was just one of those like, oh, okay, we're going there. But there's a bunch of quirky things with this movie. I want.
Oh, please go down. Please go down your list. I have one. I'm very interested hearing yours.
I'll give you your choice. The first two things. We can talk about the bat scene.
We're going to talk about the bat scene.
Or there's an interesting use of like black and white that I was really struggling to figure out. Like, what's the theme to this? Because it's used in certain parts, and then it's kind of used in other parts, and I'm like, I don't know if this makes sense other than they just wanted to do this.
Okay, well, all right. Man, I'm ready to talk about the bats, but no, let's stick with, I did see at the end of one of the credits, and like you said, I think we both saw a similar print that was remastered. There was something called Noir 3D at the end, and I did see an interview with Tony Anthony where he mentioned, and he referred to that effect as Noir 3D.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if it's revisionist history because that interview was probably like 2017 or 2018, and they were doing it like an Alamo Drafthouse type showing of this new print. But you're right, like you get into kind of like this Sin City feeling, and mind you, this is well before Sin City, black and white, where they just highlight blood. We get the red that's super high contrast against the black and white, which is kind of effective, but at the same time, like you said, it confused me because you can also certainly see, because of that effect, that's certainly what inspired Quentin Tarantino in Kill Bill when they show the bride at the altar getting killed by the assassins. In some ways, Quentin Tarantino just took that almost part and parcel, and even the assassins kind of looking overhead, it's all there, the black and white, except in this case, at first I'm like, okay, is this going to be their way of using this technique for flashbacks? And if it is, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But then there's other times later where I'm like, is this purposeful? Is there a reason for this? I can't tell, because now you just have certain characters and certain elements in black and white. It's not consistent. It's like everything, when we shoot them, the red. I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, because it opens up like the altar shot, and then it's like all black and white. I'm like, okay, I'm like, is this like Tony Anthony remembering his wedding?
Yeah.
So we're going to see that like in black and white, but he's, his wife's scarf, or like lace scarf or whatever, has got like a blue tint, or like a blue, I can't remember. Is he just remembering that one piece of clothing and color? I'm like, that's interesting. But then, later when Pike is coming out of someplace and he's like, he's in black and white, everything else on screen is in color. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, so why is he in black and white?
Yep, doesn't make sense at all. Do you think that was because this was maybe a byproduct of the print? Maybe it was less artistic and more Occam's razor, right? Simplest answer is the right one. Like, this is the best shot we could remaster, and it just happened to be with some elements in black and white.
Oh, but that works as well as any other explanation. So,
because if not, then I mean, we've talked about some artistic movies, but damn, this would have been very artistic to be like, we're not even going to be consistent in our own auteur movie. But we got to get into the bats, Pete.
Let's talk about bats.
So, did you know that there were remote controlled bats that were used not only in that scene, but also during some of the screenings of the movie in like full William Castle fashion to get folks in the theater? But I don't want to short shrift your impression of the bat, so by all means, please take it away. Bat, I literally have it in my notes here. I'm reading from this bat 3D scene ! Attacking imprisoned women !
Yeah. That you summed it up. I was going to try and give like a brief just where we're at and then the movie. So like, the bad guys have captured, I'd say, conservatively like 20 to 30 women.
That's right.
And they're all like in, I'm not even sure what it is, but it's some building that's got like a kind of like a winding, a staircase that winds around like the outside walls, and they're all sleeping. One of them looks up and they notice a rustling, and all of a sudden, like, they're besieged by 5 or 6 bats on monofilament wire.
Yes.
And kind of glowing eyes. And it really, it's bonkers. It's like, I was like, this is like an episode of Gilligan's Island or The Monkeys, where like they just don't have a budget for anything. Like, they're just like dangling. The wings are flapping because you can see, like, it's just off camera. Someone is like frantically shaking the thing to make it appear that it's flying. And this is where I thought it fell into Treasure of the Four Crowns territory, in that this scene goes on way longer than it has any need to.
100%.
There's a shot of a bat dive bombing women. They literally show the same shot, I'd say, at least 3 or 4 times.
Yes. And these are like, just to describe it to folks who have not seen this and who should check it out on their own if they'd like, these are like Ed Woodian type bats.
Yeah, this is like novelty store looking bats.
Yes. You have seen better bats at your Spirit Halloween store than what they used in this scene.
No doubt.
Yes.
No doubt.
Yes. Totally bonkers. And it just goes on, like you said, for a very unexplained period of time. Then Pike, I think, who just comes down those stairs, shoots, and that's kind of the end of our scene.
Scares them off. Yeah,
that's it.
Yes, them off.
Yeah,
they've somehow managed to kill 2 of the women. I don't know how, but the bats have killed 2 women at the end. And yeah, he just fires into the air. The bats disperse, and we move on to the next scene.
The fact that they did not become vampire women actually lets you know that they had some restraint in making this movie. So
missed opportunity.
Let's continue to give them credit here, Pete, because there was an opportunity there, but they said, no, we know what we are and we have a vision, so we will stick to it. All right, we've got to go through our list of stuff. So, all right, the rat scene. Let's go from bats to rats.
Yep.
Pretty creepy scene. And did you catch like the eyes for those rats? They had to have done an effect because they were red.
Yeah, I think that might have been some of the color correction that company did on the remaster. But yeah, those eyes were very red. The rats themselves are very dark, not your typical rat like dark gray. Like, these are like black matted fur
Yes.
And yeah, I did. I think they were all real.
It was impressive. I mean, for for the limitations that they certainly had, these things look a little gnarly.
Yeah, if you have any misgivings about rodents like that, like this, the actors got them crawling on his shoulders. Like he's tied up in the scene, and he's like, Hart has left him in this basement because that's part of it. That's his backup plan to rescue his wife in case it doesn't go well. And spoiler alert, it doesn't. That his brother won't kill him because he knows where his brother is. Poke. I'm going to get everything all good. I'm going to stop right there. But that's his backup plan, is that the brother is hidden away somewhere, so he can't be killed. Otherwise, he won't find him. But the rats come in, and they're like crawling across these like wooden beams that he's tied to. And you're meant to believe that they're gnawing on him. They're just kind of like milling about his legs. And clearly they're not really biting him. Like these seem to be very docile, trained rats, and some of the best acting in the movie, quite frankly.
Yes.
In keeping with Treasure of the Four Crowns, which opens up with, I think, was about like 30 minutes sans dialogue.
Sorry to interrupt. This movie had 51 lines of dialogue. I did see that in like a little trivia thing online.
Okay.
So
similar to that, not quite as long as Treasure of the Four Crowns, but I timed it. 13 minutes in is when you get your first dialogue.
Okay.
And that's the Irish
old
sidekick guy.
Yes.
And Tony Anthony's first line is about 34 seconds later. So again, like you're 13 minutes in and there's literally no dialogue. It's all just the fun titles. You get the attack at the church, which is just all gunfire and things like that. And then first dialogue is when he is starting his revenge tour around wherever it is it's supposed to take place.
Insert abandoned dusty town here, because it looks it and it works. Okay, so the bride who almost escapes when they're on those two stagecoaches, and it seems to see, I mean, come on, I didn't do the head count here, but it looked like there were 30 or 40 women taken hostage that were about to be sold. They're seemingly on their flight to freedom, being led by our Scottish Irish guy that we saw in the beginning. They don't make it, and we don't see a lot of these women after this. So my assumption is that they literally did not make it after that scene.
Yeah, it's funny you said Scottish, because I did the same thing. I'm like,
okay.
At first I'm like, is he Scottish? And I'm like, but then he's kind of Irish. I'm like, he might just be going back and forth. So Scottish Irish guy,
yes,
the Scotch Irish guy. Yeah, later he tells Tony, like, because he comes across like the women that are like tied and laying there, and
that's right.
He tells him, he's like, Poke went crazy and killed everyone except your wife. So again, like Tony Anthony gets all of these women killed because he didn't he didn't plan out what was going to happen when he barges in on a room full of desperados. It's not like he was trying to take down one or two. Poke's got like a gang of like 10 or 15 guys.
Yes.
And so his backup is like, well, you can't kill me because I know where your brother is. So he gets the women to escape temporarily.
Yes.
They catch up to them eventually, and then these women get killed. So good job, H.H. Hart.
Then his poor wife gets dragged through the water on horseback.
I'm like, oh man, this is again like getting a little sadistic here.
I don't think that's that actress. I'm more worried for the stunt woman or stunt man dressed as a woman that's getting literally dragged, and not for like a quick few feet here. It's a good part of the beachfront. The fact that, oh no, this really happened to a stunt person, to this actor. But then again, I guess when you're making a small budget like this.
Yeah, like I'm guessing there was not a stunt coordinator on set to be like,
I can't imagine.
When we drag you through the water for the next like 2 minutes and like the water is literally rushing to your nose.
Yes.
We're not going to do a dry run. We're just going to run. We're just going to roll it. And hopefully, good luck out there. Hopefully.
You should be fine.
It's not that deep. You'll be okay.
It'll be totally fine. What's the worst that could happen, right? And if it is, we'll put it in 3D. So that's fine. You mentioned the credits opening in intro and outro were really good.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that was thrown in 3D fashion to the screen. I have a list here. You mentioned you do as well.
Yeah.
Flaming spears. That entire scene was really interesting. And you mentioned Pike's band of henchmen. They're all like straight out of Central Casting, right?
Yeah.
Like every one of us, like guy with the ponytail, guy with the goofy hair, guy who has a yo-yo, guy with a kazoo.
Yeah, American guy.
Exactly. Guy with a sombrero, guy with the bullet vest thingy, that they always have. And then that one scene with the Native American looking guy who's throwing the arrows and the flaming spears at poor Tony Anthony, who's like in a building. That scene was actually pretty cool. It looked like it was fraught with danger to film that scene, but it was very cool looking because those arrows were coming right at the screen. And I think that's a case where 3D elements be damned, it still looked good in 2D.
Yeah, no, yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. Piggybacking off of that with the Native American henchman, when Tony Anthony, after he sets the barn on fire with himself in it, and like then is able to like, you know, fling himself through a wall to escape, comes back around, sneaks up on the native with a pitchfork, and again, like he's running towards him. He could have easily have just stealthily taken him out, but no, he's yelling as he's running towards him, announcing his presence. But
that's right.
You get the great shot of him plunging the pitchfork into the man's stomach.
Yep.
Turns towards the camera, eyes on the camera, like he is, you can tell he is looking at the camera to see where he is going, and does the slow walk, holding on to the pitchforks to make sure that the end handle of the pitchfork is going right into the camera, so you get that good 3D effect. I was laying in bed at the time, but if I had a little more energy, I would have stood up and applauded, because it was just so, you can't get any more on the nose than that was.
That was impressive. Again, for a movie that neither one of us had heard of until we started doing this, going down this 3D rabbit hole. We watched this movie. Little did we know that I'm pretty sure in Friday the 13th, Part 3, there's the pitchfork scene, but then there's also the yo-yo, both of which happen in this. So little did we know this would be the pioneer that would inspire Jason Voorhees in a few of his kills. All right, well, speaking of yo-yos, we've got a menagerie of animals, a turkey, a crow, the rabbit, the rats. There's a pet scorpion.
Yep.
One of the henchmen just kind of like grabs his finger and throws it right at the screen, and the scorpion seems to be at its tip. The guy with, of course, a pet snake.
Sure. Yeah.
The dropping torches, the branding rod, the gold coins that they drop on our hero, playing cards, throwing darts, the machete, every sharp object, axe, knife. And of course, I'm leaving one out on purpose here because, I don't want any cracks in the integrity of our plot synopsis. I want to make sure that it's not too cheeky where we're going with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you never want to assume that everyone has seen the movie and they know what we're talking about.
That's right, because they do literally show a baby's ass. The baby's cheeks are the 3D effect.
Baby's butt just delicately dipped practically on top of the camera. It was
that's right. It's like baptized
laugh out that moment where you're just kind of like, okay, all right.
Now, do you think that was one of Polk's bastard children that he's been?
I did think that. Yes.
Okay, same. Okay, yes.
Think that
because he puts the gold coin in the kid's mouth, and as I was watching that scene, again, only 51 lines of dialogue, so they're being pretty thrifty with the words in this one. But it seems like he's frequented this woman a few times.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess this baby is the byproduct of his loins. And who knows, even this teenage kid could be his kid as well. Throws the gold coin in there and basically says, watch your baby brother or sister. I'm going to have my way with your mom. That's the feel I got.
I didn't pick up on that guy being a teen. I thought he was just a very slight looking male. I thought that they were husband and wife.
Oh, that could be it too. That makes sense as a read too. Here's this guy. He's not going to fight Polk. He's literally just going to take the coin, walk away, and let him have his way with his wife because he just knows he can't fight him off.
Yeah, but it's still kind of weird, right? Because the scene opens up with him like running back to the homestead, and he like falls down. And he's like, "You have to hide. They're coming."
Yes.
And
yes.
She doesn't really hide. She's just in the home. And then when the wagon comes up with Pike, and of course, for whatever guy apparently can't get it up unless he has his musical accompaniment, which is another just a weird.
That's right. That was very weird.
This whole scene. But like the guy comes out holding the baby, almost like he's like, I don't know. Again, that's where I got the idea. I'm like, is this like the bastard child of Polk here?
Yep.
And then he sticks like the coin in the guy's mouth is almost kind of like, yeah, like, well, here's your payment. Now you just wait outside. And so I was like, there's all sorts of like weird shit going on in that scene. But yeah, it was interesting to me because it's set up like that she's going to run away to hide. She's obviously not happy that the guy is there, but like he comes in like kicking off his boots and undoing his suspenders, like, clearly this is a common thing for him to just kind of show up and be like, okay, time to service me.
Yes.
And again, thankfully, in one of the few things that H.H. Hart does not blow, he kills the musician guy and the other, and the whoever else, the other henchman on the roof that comes walking in, and then, beats the shit out of Polk. So, like, at least there's some immediate retribution for what's about to go down there. But again, just a weird, fucked up scene.
All started by a 3D baby's butt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Towards the end, Pete, we get the big explosion. I did actually kind of enjoy the part where Tony Anthony, H.H. Hart, where he's literally beating the shit out of Pike with a wooden stick. Guys, you do know this scene is done. It's literally been now 40 seconds of him taking slow-mo shots at this guy. Like, we're going to move on, right? It's like, no. It's like, all right, well, lean into it. Let's go for it. And let's do it in slow-mo. Why not?
Yeah, the ending, again, like, it's been done many, many times, but it was still interesting how the whole, like, abandoned town and the wife is there, like, tied up on a pole, and, like, almost kind of like the signal for, like, yeah, all right, show up if you're gonna, if we're gonna end this, come. So this, he's got, like, his henchmen all kind of waiting around for Hart to show up, and again, like, Hart not even attempting to try and sneak about the town. He just rides in into the center of town, and
that's our man with the plan who has no plan.
Our man with the plan who has no plan. He tells Pike, "This is about you and me. Let her go." And so he does. And as she's running down the street, he then shoots her, not fatally.
Yes.
But again, like, how much more danger can Hart put a woman in? And the answer is none. None more danger.
He's only led to the death of another 30 women before this. So he's thinking, all right, well, if I can just save one, then maybe that works. But if not, right, I tried.
Before we get to the ending,
okay,
just one other note, and it's not a big thing, but
please, yeah.
I was laughing at this too. We're gonna dial it back to the beginning of the movie.
Okay.
Art runs into the Irish-Scottish guy who's just like sitting in like a vestal in a church that's like burnt down. Like, why he's there, no one never explained.
It looks cool. It looks cool. It's a visual.
Yeah. So there's a brief interaction there. He leaves. The Irish-Scottish guy comes running after him, and they have this conversation where he's like, "Can you handle a gun?" And he does this whole, like, religious thing. Not gonna, there's other ways to settle conflict or something like that. And he's like, "Well, can you drive a wagon?" And then he proceeds to list of things. Well, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you milk a cow? And it's not funny. It's not like, there's nothing funny about it.
Yep.
But Tony Anthony's reaction is like, it's the funniest fucking thing he's ever heard in his life. He's like cracking up, and he's like, "Oh, okay, all right, come on with me, get on the horse with me." And I had like this vision, because he gets on the horse, the two of them are riding off, and he just starts like yammering away. Like,
that's right.
Just if this was a comedy, you would expect like the quick cut next scene. He's like dumping him off the horse and like leaving him there because he won't shut up and going on by himself. Because that's what should have happened, but it doesn't. But again, another randomly weird scene.
That scene has the music box that's playing, and that's again like a nod to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where you get because the music to this was actually really good. Like, very cinematic, fit like the spaghetti Western genre. And that's something big in that genre, where you have like these little whimsical notes, and you have something that's independent. It's just a music box. But then when you throw it into like a shootout, especially a Sergio Leone style shootout, this is the timing mechanism for us as the audience and for the people, right? Like, when this stops playing, someone will be dead. This is serious, but you get that juxtaposition of what's just a music box. It's kind of innocent and childlike. And in this, like, they kind of play around with it a little bit, but again, never fully sticking the landing, because then we go into comic relief mode with this guy who could be Scottish, could be Irish, doesn't know how to use a gun. And I should have said maybe that whole time, because that is talking about lines. The one line they revisit as like the bookend, where you ain't going nowhere with all them maybes. Tony Anthony says at the very end, that's literally his last words before he rides off. But yeah, that last scene, beats the guy literally with a wooden bat down the stairs, ties him up to that windmill. The explosions, well,
he's Tony Anthony's got got a flair for the dramatic. That's
Okay.
the only thing that I can think of.
I bet they look great in 3D just to have these random, unexplained explosions happening. I will say that they put an exclamation point at the end with that windmill where they blow the living H out of Pike because he is gone.
There's nothing left. He is most sincerely dead.
That's right. There was a splinter in that baby's butt from how far all the wood exploded from that windmill explosion. Poor kid. Anything else that got your attention to this movie, Pete? Because again, not Oscar winning, not necessarily memorable, but interesting nonetheless in our exploit through 3D movies, right?
Totally interesting. Totally entertaining to watch. Again, like we were talking offline, like probably not something we'll revisit anytime soon. But again, at the ending, the odds are stacked against Tony Anthony. His wife is shot. She's alive, and they're holed up in one of the buildings. All the henchmen are coming in, and for whatever reason, rather than either try to burn them out or any other number of ways that they could have finished the job, they just randomly start diving through windows.
Yes.
and that just allows Tony, who has got a kick-ass like shotgun. Like I've never seen that weapon before. I don't know if that's like historically accurate or not, but he just starts blowing everyone away as they come in the door. Strategy is not a strong suit from anyone in this film. There's really none to be found, but that's to their detriment, but that's to our enjoyment and entertainment. Yes. So I guess in some ways we thank them for having zero strategic skill.
And that reminds me, I got to loop back in, and maybe this is the bookend to that moment is, like you mentioned early on, the shotgun that comes through the rafters to literally blow the guy like through the legs. And you have to admit, like there was a moment where you flinched.
There's nothing good that's happening there. But like,
no,
this movie's not a comedy, and it plays it pretty much straight the entire way.
That's right.
That scene where like one of the last henchmen, looks in the building, doesn't see him. Suddenly, Tony Anthony's somehow underneath the floorboards, which has like a giant hole in it, and he sticks the shotgun up through it.
Makes no noise, removes the rafter without a sound, able to get the shotgun, cock it, and then point it at a cock.
Cock-a-doodle don't, because someone's twigs and berries are scattered all over the dirty town.
That's right. Luckily, that wasn't a 3D effect. I'm somewhat grateful for that.
They amazingly showed some restraint on that one. Babies' butts, no problem.
That's right.
Gold coins, corn, pokers, horses eating watermelons, bats, all that's fair game. But no, we're not going the full Monty on the 3D.
Yeah, that does remind me, Pete, that you have to now think about this. There is someone out there whose ass, as a child, was turned into a 3D effect for the audience's benefit, not ours. I don't think it was ours, but it's for an audience's benefit, and now 3D also for people to enjoy, and has this out there for posterity, for their posterior.
Yes. I like to think that this person has no idea.
I would hope so. Yes.
That movie.
Yes.
And they've lived their lives in like just this unaware bliss that would make for an interesting documentary of like someone tracking this person down. Actually, it probably wouldn't make for an interesting documentary.
No.
I'd make for an interesting 5-minute YouTube video of someone tracking them
That's
down.
right.
Like, is this your ass?
They actually used some stunt babies for that one, so it's not.
Stunt butt?
This other kid had a butt that actually lent itself more for the 3D effects. There were a few babies that may or may not have been harmed during the making of this movie.
Lowering it toward the camera, lower it, and in a stunt butt.
That's right. At least they had standards, Pete. So
they were not high standards, but they did have standards.
They were standards, yes. So that's coming at you. We discovered this movie on our search for other crappy movies, but to then see the impact this movie had on movies that we actually do remember growing up watching, it's kind of neat. Like you said, doesn't make the movie better, doesn't make it good, but it does make it an artifact that now, if we're ever at a trivia night and someone mentions the first 3D movie, you and I can actually raise our hands and we actually know the answer to this. Hey, what's the movie that started the 80s 3D craze? Wasn't Jaws 3D, it wasn't Amityville 3D or Friday the 13th 3D. It was coming at you.
Yeah, somewhere, some way, that will be worth 10 points to us in some capacity.